Hi, how you doing? My name is Jim May, and I'm a storyteller and a writer. I've been making my living now full time as a storyteller and a writer for 30 some years. Now, I spent my first 15 years out of university teaching. I taught elementary school for 10 years, and I taught at the community college level as a teacher and counselor for 5 years after that. And throughout that time, I discovered storytelling. I grew up in Spring Grove, Illinois, not far from you all. Antioch was really important to me as I was growing up. My first bank account was at the Antioch Savings and Loan. My dad used to take me to the auction, which was in Antioch, and we bought one of my horses at that auction. It was very exciting, and I learned that students love to listen to stories. Students of all ages, people of all ages. Still today, my job includes telling to preschoolers and senior citizens and university professors and corporate board members. So I'm going to share a little bit on why I do what I do and how I do it. I've had many different jobs. I've worked construction. That's how I worked my way through college. Had a good union job, so I was able to pay for college and help support my mother, who was a widow. I worked on a farm. I was born on a farm in Spring Grove, and we lived 8 years on different farms. We were tenant farmers. We never had any money. But when I was 8, we moved into Spring Grove, tiny little town, It seemed like a big city to me because the houses were so close together. I kind of summarize that. I say I was born on a dairy farm, population 8. When I turned 7.5, we moved into Spring Grove, population 200. And by the time I was 16, I was sick of that little podunk town. I longed for a place that had a dance hall for teenagers. I longed for a place where you could take a girlfriend to the movies and make out a little bit, maybe. I was tired of being referred to as a hick by my more urbane and cosmopolitan friends from Antioch. Finally, at the age of 18, I escaped and enrolled at the University of Illinois, population 40,000, and I majored in Russian history and urban problems. It's an absolute true fact. I loved history. People would ask me, most of my friends in college were in engineering or business or pre-med. They say, what are you going to do with a history major? I'd say, I don't know. Well, it turns out I love the stories. And I have been making a good living for 35 years now, telling stories. So how did that all come about? What was my inspiration? I think the first inspiration was growing up on a farm and being around animals. Now I want to tell you a story about a dog on our farm. Her name was Bootsy because she had 4 white feet. Now, you always think of cattle farms, dairy farms. We had a dairy farm. You always think of dogs on those farms, big, tough, collies, Australian blue heelers, Australian shepherds, maybe even Dobermans, tough dogs chasing the cows. My dad liked to cross these rat terriers with chihuahuas. And that was Bootsy. Little ornery, little yappy dog. She favored the chihuahua side of the family, both in form and temperament, but she had a country dog's heart. She loved to chase cows. And she loved to attack cows. She'd run up behind the cow and nip them right in the heels, and the cows, being tall, long-legged, black and white Holstein cows, they'd kick right over the top of her, miss her every time. Worked out pretty good. She was a cattle-herding chihuahua. My dad thought it was comical. He would, bring his friends in the back and have them watch Bootsy chase the cows and nip the cows. Other farmers, they look at that and they say, Well, I'll be darned. That just goes to show you, stuff like that. Farmers aren't always real talkative. Well, one day my dad went to the Antioch sale barn, I believe, and brought home a new cow. Different than our tall, long-legged, black and white Holstein cow. We called her the brindle cow because of her color. She was kind of a marble conglomeration of tan and rust color and browns and blacks and chocolate. She was beautiful. She looked like a Rocky Road ice cream sundae with 4 legs and a tail. You've probably seen brindle bulldogs or brindle boxers. It's a common color in certain breeds of dogs. Well, we thought she was amazing. Most beautiful thing we'd ever seen. We kids, Plus she was new. We almost never had money to buy anything, so this was a whole cow. This was a big purchase. But after a while, we found out why whoever sold that cow had sold it to my dad. She was a kicker. And there's nothing wrong with her giving milk. What was wrong was her attitude. And there's nothing worse than having a kicker if you're a dairy farmer, because you got to go back there twice a day, by those big, powerful, strong hind legs and pull on those teats, Sure enough, same week that Dad bought that cow, he came back into the house from the barn, blood streaming down the side of his face. He'd been kicked by the brindle cow. Well, we kids were amazed because my dad was so good with animals, horses, cows, anything. My dad was born in Spring Grove in 1896. He was really more of a grandfather to me. And probably he's why I'm a storyteller, because he didn't even have electricity in his life until the 1930s when electricity came into the area. I'm not sure when it reached Antioch. So he told stories, told jokes, passed the time with his friends, horse trading stories, stories about animals, stories about funny things that had been done in the family. But he was good with horses and cows. He almost never got his foot stepped on, almost never got kicked. So when Dad got kicked by that brindle cow, and it was serious, he had blood coming down his side of his face. He had to go into Doc Kagan down in Spring Grove and get 7 stitches. So we kids, we figured if that cow was so tricky and dangerous that it got Dad, who was very smart around animals, we stayed away from her. We gave her a wide berth, as they say. However, Bootsy had never figured that out. Chihuahuas don't have a lot of extra brains to figure things out. They have just enough brains, kind of smashed into that little knobby skull. Enough brains just to think about basic things, like eating, sleeping, peeing on the rug, stuff like that. So sure enough, 2 or 3 days after Dad got kicked, Dad and I and Bootsy were bringing the cows home about 4:30 in the afternoon, bringing them in from the pasture for milking, and I watched in horror as Bootsy ran up and bit the brindle cow. Just sunk her little needle teeth right into the little fleshy heel of that brindle cow. And I thought, uh-oh. And sure enough, the brindle cow struck. Now remember, she wasn't tall and lanky like the Holstein cows that would kick right over the top of Bootsy. No, the brindle cow was built powerful but close to the ground, short-legged, and she just kicked straight out. Boom! Caught Bootsy right between the eyes. Boing. I remember Dad saying it was like a prize fight. It was like a jab. Boom! It was like his favorite boxer, Sugar Ray Robinson. You can look that guy up. He was amazing. Caught Bootsy right between the eyes, punted her through the air. I stood in the pasture watching my Chihuahua spiraling into the clouds. My cattle herding Chihuahua had become a flying Chihuahua. Then she came down in that same spiral. I was afraid she was going to corkscrew her tail into the ground. Instead, she hit with kind of a sickening thud, gave a couple kicks with her white feet. That's why we called her Bootsy. She had those 4 white feet. And then the feet got very still. The arterial blood that was spasming out of her nose settled down. And there she lay, just as quiet and still and stiff as a board. Broke my heart. I put her in a gunny sack, a burlap bag, and I dragged her all the way home. That probably didn't do her any good. I set the bag at the foot of my bed. I cried myself to sleep. I was going to bury her the next morning in the ever-expanding pet cemetery. Next morning, I woke up. So did Bootsy. Jumped out of the sack, trotted across the plank floor just as easy as you please, even cleared up this disgusting nasal snort that she had had all her life. When that cow kicked her in the head, must have knocked the calcified booger loose or something. I don't know what happened. But she lived 10 more free-breathing years after that. I call that story Bootsy the Cattle Herding Chihuahua. Someday, I hope to make it a picture book. She was a real dog. She really lived. And that story is pretty much 100% true. In fact, I have a drawing of her. I'm going to show you. I have a new collection of stories. Many years ago, when I first started telling stories, I wrote my first book. It was a children's picture book. Now, I've written adult books since then. But this book was birthed out of necessity. I was telling ghost stories at the library when I first started telling stories. And I was still teaching, I think, elementary school or working at MCC, I forget which. And I was telling stories, in my part-time. And I told ghost stories one year at the Woodstock Library. I taught in Woodstock for 10 years and then 5 years at MCC, so I knew a lot of people. I was in the grocery store one summer after that Halloween ghost story event at Woodstock Library, and a friend of mine saw me and said, Jim, my family really enjoyed the ghost stories you told last Halloween at the Opera House. I said, oh, gee, thanks. I was just getting started, so it was great to get a little positive feedback. I said, thanks a lot. She said, yeah, my whole family came, even my little bitty ones. I said, oh, gee, thanks for the support. And then she said, my 3-year-old has not slept alone for 6 months. I had scared that poor little kid. So I decided I better create a ghost story that was more funny than scary, and I wrote a book called The Boo Baby Girl Meets the Ghost of Mabel's Gable. Some of you might know the story. I've told stories in a lot of schools around Antioch and McHenry County and every other place. So now I have a sequel. It's a chapter book for older students, and it's called The Further Adventures of the Boo Baby Girl. And if you look, you can see her sidekick, Bootsy the Cattle Herding Chihuahua. You see those 4 white feet, right? And actually, in the story, we call her Bootsy the Bilingual Cattle Herding Chihuahua because she teaches the Boo Baby some Spanish. I'm steadily, in my own bungling, procrastinating way, I'm learning some Spanish. In fact, in the book, one of the things that Bootsy might teach the Boo Baby is a Spanish lullaby. And maybe some of you know it. Maybe your grandparents or mother and dad, uncles, tios, tias teach this to you. Every year I take a group of storytellers, writers, a little bit of everything. I've had lawyers come. I've had people who just want to learn about Mexico. I take them to the beautiful city of Oaxaca, Oaxaca City in the state of Oaxaca. Now, Oaxaca is an international center for art and culture. And I've been going for 15 years now. And one year, in the morning, in first class, we sit in this beautiful hacienda that's made into a hotel. We sit in the library, in the sala, and I ask people, why they came, why they're glad to be here. And a woman from Richmond, Illinois, not far from you, said that she was so glad to finally be in Mexico because her grandmother came from Mexico, and her grandmother used to babysit her. And now she was in Grandma's country. And she taught the whole class, this lullaby, and I learned it, and I teach it to other students and anyone who would like to learn. And my Spanish is not great, but I'll do the best I can. Here it is. Maybe you can learn it. Me gusta la leche, me gusta el café, pero más me gusta los ojos de usted. Me gusta la leche, I love milk. Me gusta el café, I love coffee. Pero más me gusta, but most of all, los ojos de usted. I love your eyes, my little baby. Can't you imagine a little grandma, a little abuela holding her baby and singing that? Me gusta la leche, me gusta el café, pero más me gusta los ojos de usted. Got to kiss the baby after that. That's the parts kids really like. Got to kiss the baby. So I know one of the things that your teachers have asked me to talk about is what inspired me to become a storyteller. Well, everything. I grew up on a farm, and there were always stories about animals. My dad was an old man already when I was born. He was 51 years old. He had 11 brothers and sisters. I had a lot of old aunts and uncles who would come and tell stories. And I was surrounded by animals who did silly things. I have one story in my book. I should show you that too, I guess. This was my second book, The Farm on Nippersink Creek. And one of the stories in here won me an Emmy Award. And Studs Terkel, a pretty famous writer from Chicago, somewhere in our radio interview called me a master storyteller, so I don't know if I was or not, but my publisher said, we're putting that on the cover. My wife did the drawing. She's an artist, and we lived on a couple different farms. We rented on the Nippersink Creek. My grandpa rented a farm on the Nippersink Creek in Spring Grove, right across from the Scott Forge factory. And now my wife and I live in Alden, and we live on the headwaters of the Nippersink Creek. So actually, I'm the first of the 3 generations that actually has bought land on the Nippersink Creek. So that seems like kind of a legacy that I'm proud of. My family came to Spring Grove in the 1840s and 50s, so I'm a long-time McHenry County native. Now, there's a little bit about Bootsy in this collection, but other animals too. I have a story about when I was 5 years old, I was convinced that our farm was haunted by a duck. And I call that story The Spectral Duck, or Terror in the Barnyard, or Poultrygeist. So, if you're interested in local history, you might be interested in that. Speaking of Emmy Awards, I think you can see my Emmy. There it is. Up there on the shelf. That's where I keep it. If you're wondering about the beams, my wife and I built a house out of an old 1848 dairy barn, so I'm right at home. There's so much to talk about, so much to tell you. I've been able to travel a lot with storytelling. I've told stories in every state, I think, except Alaska and Wyoming. I was trying to figure that out the other day. I think those are the 2, maybe Vermont and New Hampshire. I've told stories in Ireland and France and Scotland, Wales, in London, Mexico, Canada. So storytelling, for me, a little kid growing up in a town of 200, it's been a way to see the world. You know, I went off to the University of Illinois, raised on a dairy farm, population 8, grew up in Spring Grove, population 200, went to the University of Illinois, population 40,000. But something brought me back to Spring Grove because I started telling stories, and I started something called the Illinois Storytelling Festival. We put up tents behind my mother's house in the village park, and people came from all over America. We had people who would come from 14 different states, and we'd have 2,000 to 3,000 people come to hear stories. You can go there today. The festival isn't there anymore. I produce storytelling on the Woodstock Square now, at the Opera House and at Stage Left. And if you want to be tuned into what I'm doing, you can friend me on Facebook or Instagram, or you can email me at jimmaystories@gmail.com. jimmaystories, STORIES, @gmail.com. Well, I have another book. Most of my income comes from live storytelling. Oh, there goes one of the books. But I also love to write. And it's very helpful because I can put the book in the mail and let it do its work, and I can take a nap. It's not quite like live storytelling. I do also produce CDs and DVDs. But the act of writing and the act of telling a story are two different things. And I love both of them. One is energy, it's immediate, you can look in the eyes of the people you're telling stories to. But with a book, you can take your time and spend more time with language and so forth. I've been inspired by several writers in terms of technique. Probably one of the most inspiring is Ray Bradbury, who I know you guys study. And Ray Bradbury's book on writing, I think it's called The Zen of Writing by Ray Bradbury, is so full of the joy of writing. He started realizing, he said, when he was about 21, that he could get up in the morning, free associate, and by noon he would have an outline at least of a story. And he was prolific. He wrote hundreds of stories. And he wrote until he was in his 90s. Now, I had a chance to meet Ray Bradbury in Los Angeles one time. I was supposed to meet him at a theater, and the plans got confused, or I got confused, I guess, and I did not get to meet him, which is one of my heartbreaking stories of my career. He did send me a note. It said bravo, because of some stories we told in his hometown in Waukegan at the Genesee Theater, and he made a little hand drawing of a cat on the card for no apparent reason. But he was exuberant about his writing. He loved to write. He said, write down just ideas that come into your head, put them together. He said every morning he would wake up and his imagination would be like a bomb going off, and he'd spend the rest of the morning picking up the pieces and putting it into a story. Now, you just got to find out how you work best. I work best on my feet, thinking on my feet. I'm not looking at any notes right now, even though I made some earlier to get my thoughts together. But some people memorize a script. Some of my storytelling friends memorize a script, and that's okay if you can kind of get off the formality of a script, look your listener in the eye, and tell them a story. Now, in terms of careers in storytelling, obviously you can become someone like me and tell stories professionally, but there are many, many other uses of storytelling. I've trained lawyers. There's an amazing story about a criminal lawyer. His name is Jerry Spence from Idaho, a very famous criminal lawyer. He's known for telling stories to the jury. There's one that he tells allegedly in a capital case where the jury is trying to decide whether the guilty party is going to be executed or get life imprisonment. There's two hearings usually. There's the trial, then there's a sentencing hearing. And he's known in capital cases to tell this story. The king was very boastful and proud and insecure. And the fool, he'd allow the fool to come and tell stories about him, the king, because the fool told a very important story in medieval times. Because the fool, number one, entertained everybody, and that was important because there wasn't all the things we have on screens now. But also, the fool was the only one allowed to make fun of the king, which served two purposes. Number one, the king had to know what the people were laughing about, had to know what his weaknesses were without losing face. And since it was just a fool, everybody could laugh and have a good time, and the king got the information he needed. But this particular story says the fool, the court jester, was getting too powerful and too beloved, so the king was going to do him in. So he said to the fool, he brought him to the court in front of all the people and said, "You are so wise." And the king sat on his throne with his hands behind his back. He said, "You are so wise. I have a bird in my hand. Tell me if the bird is alive or if the bird is dead, if you are so wise." Of course, it was a trap. If the fool said the bird was alive, the king would squash the bird, crush the bird in his hand behind his back, and take out the dead bird. If he said the bird was dead, the king would let the bird fly. Here's what the fool said: "Your Majesty, the answer is in your hands." And Jerry Spence, a criminal lawyer, a very famous criminal lawyer, and I'm sure very wealthy, he used that in a capital crime, he would tell the story and he'd look the jury in the eye and say, you know, my client's life is in your hands. Do you want to crush it, or do you want to allow him to live? Life imprisonment. I spent an afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, some years ago, working with a professor of communication from Santa Clara University in California, who was also an attorney. We were training lawyers to be able to tell stories to a jury. Because her research said that if you hear facts in a story, you're 4 times more likely to remember it rather than just hearing it as a lecture. There's a book called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink. And he says in the 21st century, facts are no longer as powerful. This was even before the whole debate about fake news and alternate facts that we've heard in the political discussions. This was before that. He said, facts are so ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and easy to obtain, the internet, that they lose their power. And what has power is facts plus emotion in context. And he calls that storytelling. And he gives an example. The queen died, the king died. Facts. The queen died, the king died of a broken heart. Story. We're getting toward the end here. I don't know what advice I have for you. Listen. Become a good listener. Become a good observer. Notice things around you, people, plants, suffering, joy. And never, ever, ever doubt yourself. There's a wonderful book, I think it's called The Myth of Genius, The Genius Myth. And the author says anybody, any human being with a functioning brain, if they devote 10,000 hours to something they want to master, they can do it. Whether that's being a concert pianist, whether it's being a professional golfer, whether it's being a Nobel-winning scientist, 10,000 hours of really good practice. Now, for me, I'm too old. I'm not going to be able to make it on the senior golf tour or become a concert pianist or the many other things I want to do. But you, the world is at your feet. The world is your oyster. And all the stories, the old tales, the myths, always say, you know, it doesn't matter if you're wounded like Cinderella or Harry Potter. You can go off and you can be better than you ever dreamed. You can become a princess or a prince. You can become a wizard like Harry Potter. Doesn't matter how much you fail or how much you're wounded. Michael Jordan was cut from his sophomore basketball team. How about that? Abraham Lincoln lost more elections than he won. So don't give up. Don't accept anyone else's estimation of your intelligence, even like intelligence tests and tests we take in school. We actually know very little about how amazing and flexible the human brain is. Don't ever forget that. What else? In the old stories there are always mentors. So some old wise person that helps the main character along. So don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, Cinderella had the fairy godmother. Luke Skywalker had Yoda. In Lord of the Rings, there was Gandalf. Here's one last story, and then we're done. Good luck. I'd love to come visit you sometime when we're all in school. This comes from the Hindu tradition of India. There was an old man camped at the edge of the village. In the morning, he was saying his prayers to the rising sun, as he did almost every day of his life. And all of a sudden, he heard footsteps, someone running up to him from behind saying, "Master, Master, where is it?" Well, he turned around. There was this young peasant running up to him in great haste and agitation. And the old man said, "You know, son, calm yourself. What is it that you ask of me?" "Master, I had a dream last night, and in my dream, I came to this place in the village, this crossroads, and I met an old man, and here you are. I met an old wise man, and here you are. And in my dream, that man gave me a precious jewel." The old man kind of nodded and reached down into an old dirty sack that he was carrying and took out a ruby the size of his fist. He said, I have no use for this. I can't remember where I found it. Of course, you can have it. And he gave this jewel of immeasurable wealth to this young peasant who had never had more than 2 copper coins in his hand at one time. And the young man could not believe his good fortune. He walked home holding the ruby in the palm of his hand. He held it up to the rising sun. He was awash in the crimson shadow of it. That day he spent all day sitting in his humble cottage on his one chair, sat the ruby on the table, turned it this way and that way, admiring it, stroking it. They say he did not sleep well that night. And the next morning, on his way to his daily labor with the ruby secure in his pocket, he came upon that same old man. And according to this old Hindu wisdom tale, the young man gave the ruby back to the old man with these words, I don't want this. What I want is what you know that made it so easy to give it away. And may we all be so wise. I hope you've enjoyed this. Get in touch with me. Send me your writing. It might take me quite a while to read it and comment on it, but I will promise to do that. Just don't send me any original copies. I lose stuff all the time. But good luck. Never doubt yourself. And don't be afraid to listen to your mentors. Take care. God bless.